everyone, and welcome back to Lies, the part of extra history where I tell you everything we got wrong, where we screwed up, and all the interesting facts we just didn't have time for in the main show. There's a lot less that was wrong with this time around, though, which is actually awesome, because it buys me more time to talk about the stuff that I really wanted to talk about last time, like historical perspectives and different theories on how to see history. But before we get to all that, let's go over the stuff we did screw up. In the first episode, we mentioned Miyamoto Musashi, but we don't mention him again. Where'd he go? Well, theoretically, he fought at Sekigahara, but there's a lot of confusion as to his timeline, and no one knows exactly when he lived, to the point where historians date his death to before some other historians date him being born. So he gets a nod, but we couldn't really find a place to legitimately put him in the show. Also in the first episode, a lot of people were shocked at how unreal it was for the Lord of Imagawa to cut through an Ashigaru's spear. Now, I'm the first to say, I'll embellish minor details for the story if they just don't exist in the historical record. But the funny thing is, this actually wasn't one of them. Multiple sources talk about this very incident. They could all be getting it from one ancient source that did some embellishing in the first place, but it also wasn't unheard of for peasants to have spears that were just simply bamboo, which a well-made samurai sword could easily chop into. In episode 4, we said that Usugi Kenshin died in 1577. I have no idea how that number got in there. We corrected it via annotation, but the number is just wrong. He died in 1578. In episode 5, we accidentally called Oba Nobunaga's eldest son Oba Nobukatsu. Oba Nobukatsu was his second son. His eldest son, the one caught by Mitsuhide, was Nobutada. Okay, now that business is taken care of, we can talk about how we talk about history. This is going to be a vast oversimplification because it's a 10-minute YouTube video, but there are basically two major ways of looking at history: Great Man theory of history and Marxist or people's history. Great Man theory of history emphasizes the actions of individuals and focuses on principal actors in historical events. Marxist history focuses on the underlying economic or social forces at work, presenting a deterministic view of history. Social conditions and economic conditions in France, for example, were unstable, and the French monarchy therefore had to fall, that sort of thing. I sort of believe in a space between. Take the fall of the Roman Republic. Social and economic conditions made it almost certain the Republic was going to collapse, but it could have collapsed a dozen times in the half-century before it did. It took Julius Caesar to make this happen. And what if you had a terrible first emperor instead of Augustus? Would Rome have vanished from the West 500 years before it did? Would the Republic have come back in some new and vitalized form? Who knows? The underlying social and economic causes are essential, but to my mind they aren't everything. The actions of people create those causes, and the actions of people, even as individuals, can change them. Extra history will probably tip a bit more towards the Great Man theory, as it's easy to create a coherent narrative around, and some of the events we cover seem to really lean that way, right? Like, why did the Sengoku Jidai end when it did rather than 50 years earlier or 50 years later? Because of Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa. There's this old folk song about the three unifiers of Japan. In it, they're sitting around a bird cage, and someone asks them, "What will you do if the bird does not sing?" And Nobunaga says, "Kill it." And Hideyoshi says, "Make it want to sing." And Tokugawa simply says, "Wait." And I think you need all of these attitudes to have unified Japan. Strength alone wasn't enough, but strength was necessary. Reconciliation alone wasn't enough. It required the backing of strength. And even together, these weren't enough. They required stability, and stability requires great patience. I think there's something to take away here when we think about our conflicts, even in our present day. But on to facts and trivia. First, I want to talk a little bit about names. It seemed like a lot of people had a hard time with names here, and I understand that. I mean, I have a hard time with names even when they're people I know. But it's sort of the price of learning history outside of the West. We have to embrace it and put an effort into thinking of those names as the people they are. Once you do this a few times and become comfortable with the names in a culture, it becomes easy and you won't have the same problem again. Try going through the series a second time and see if the names seem less muddled. It'll probably be a lot easier that way. And just so you know, Japanese names go family name first, personal name last. So Oda Nobunaga was a member of the Oda clan with the given name Nobunaga, the opposite of how it is here in the US or in Europe. Also, Ages in Japan. Back in the Sengoku Jidai, people were considered one at birth. And they gained a year not on their birthday, but when a calendar year passed. So a person could be 1 to 2 years older by the Japanese reckoning system than by the Western systems. We try to keep it consistent with our ages, but not all of the sources said which system they were using. And in episode 2, the post of the sandal bearer, which Hideyoshi had, wasn't just about carrying sandals. Warlords had their sandal bearers do all sorts of tasks, which is probably how Hideyoshi got noticed, not for his proficiency at carrying sandals. And remember when Nobunaga gets shot in episode 3 by a ninja and we said he fired 2 shots at them? Well, there's some good debate about how he did this. He could have used 2 arquebuses and just thrown one out, like we depicted, or he could have shoved 2 bullets in the barrel of the gun, because you could just do that with these old weapons. Oh, and that ninja? Nobunaga finally caught him, and he buried him up to the neck in sand and had his head sawed through with a bamboo saw over the course of several days. Tells you a little bit about Nobunaga. But on to things less gruesome. Remember how we said the temple Ishiyama Hongan-ji was where Osaka is today? Well, it's actually the reason that Osaka is where it is today. The town grew up around the temple, not the other way around. Speaking of which, these monks were some of the biggest gun manufacturers in Japan. And as crazy as it sounds, Japan almost certainly had more guns by the end of the Sengoku Jidai than all of Europe did. Which brings me to talking about monks. There is some objection to people calling them monks. This is a tough line because they fought under banners with Buddhist slogans, and they did actually have Buddhist ceremonies at their temples. And yes, many of them were probably just in it for the power and the money, and many of them behaved in very un-monk-like fashion. But we call the crusading Christian orders like the Templars monastic orders, and even today we refer to certain Islamic clerics who I think many would argue are operating outside the bounds of Islam as clerics. So historically, we have to let even non-monk-like monks be monks, if that's what people said they were, and just judge them on their actions. In episode 4, I talk about Takeda Shingen basically inventing the cavalry charge in Japan, and this is pretty much literally true. Japanese horses were generally smaller and slower than their European or Middle Eastern cousins, so they couldn't carry heavily armored warriors and provide the shock needed for a cavalry charge. Takeda Shingen changed that by importing horses and picking up the best native horses. But what blows my mind, given Western history, is that in one man's lifetime, Takeda Shingen got to see the cavalry charge become dominant and obsolete. By the time Shingen died, firearms were already starting to push aside a type of warfare that was the staple of forces in Europe for centuries. And I have to talk about Tsunemon, the guy who dove off the castle and broke through enemy lines in episode 4. Well, he might have actually stuck out through a sewage grate. There's some debate on this. But so legendary is this guy, I kid you not, that there's a monument in San Antonio, Texas that compares him to the defenders of the Alamo. But since I'm on episode 4 and we talked about Uesugi Kenshin and Takeda Shingen, let's just talk about how cool these guys actually were. I can't stress it enough. If you get a chance, just go look this up. Because these guys, they were rivals, but they were also strange friends. They had this code of honor between each other. And Kenshin even wept when he heard Takeda Shingen's death. Kenshin might have been also one of the only guys in this period to care about the peasants, too. And Mitsuhide, why did he betray Nobunaga? Nobody really knows. There's a lot of conspiracies floating around this, but most of them have been pretty much debunked. And I'm running out of time, I got 2 episodes left, so I'm gonna try and blaze through this. But episode 5, you know when Hanzo was all like, I got a wicked secret path? Well, there was actually another guy with them, and he didn't believe the ninja, so he went his own way, and he promptly got caught. Oh, and I'd also like to tell the tale of Oichi, the sister of Nobunaga, who, if you remember early on, got married to the Asai. But I don't think I have the time, because this is a long story. But if you want to hear a tale full of woe, just go look her up. Oh, and this one's a kick. You know the monks who Nobunaga was always beating down? Well, Hideyoshi, when he was done beating on them, in typical Hideyoshi fashion, brought them onto his side, not to fight, but to spread Buddhism and be a nuisance to the Christians in Kyushu. Also, one thing I didn't get to mention was that Hideyoshi was a patron of the arts, and things like the tea ceremony we know of today comes from that patronage. Unfortunately, he also later killed the guy who invented the tea ceremony. So, And man, there's so much I want to talk about the Korean invasion, but that'll probably have to wait till we do a whole series on it. Just look up a guy named Admiral Yi. Oh, and also, a grisly fact about this period. Samurai usually took the severed heads of their opponents as proof of their kills, but they killed so many people in Korea that shipping back the heads to Japan started to become a pain. And so they began just taking the noses instead. Eventually, this pile of tens of thousands of severed noses became entombed in a 9-meter high mound of earth in Kyoto. You can still find the site in Kyoto today. It's called the Mimizuka. So if you go there and you want to see a grisly monument, Mimizuka. Alright, on to episode 6. Remember how I said Ishida fled the funeral of the head of the Maeda clan? Well, he did so in a woman's dress, hiding in a woman's palanquin. And I think this actually sort of contributes to why Tokugawa let him go. Tokugawa was a patient guy. He knew that one final war was coming, and he knew that if it wasn't Ishida who led it, someone else would. I think he wanted someone he already knew, someone he was already spying on, leading this thing. And I think he knew that because of Ishida's disgrace around what happened at that funeral, it'd be harder for people to publicly side with him. Also, Monotada, Tokugawa's buddy who gave his life to hold that one castle for as long as he could, he's one of the best examples of what we generally think of as samurai ethics. Before he died, he wrote one last letter to his son, which is a compelling read and I think tells us a lot about samurai ideals. We still have a copy of that letter today. I'll link it below. You know how in episode 5 I talked about how conscious Tokugawa was of actually working out his succession so that what happened to Nobunaga and what happened to Hideyoshi wouldn't happen again and the country wouldn't be just plunged back into chaos? Well, he actually went further than we even got to talk about, establishing 3 different branches of the Tokugawa family and then writing detailed rules of inheritance so that way, even if one of the lines failed and didn't produce any heirs, there would still be a legitimate Tokugawa to call upon. There are so many things I want to talk about, but I've already made this way over long. But you know how Tokugawa attacked Hideyoshi's son and said it was on the flimsy pretenses? I have to tell this story before I quit. Hideyoshi's son built a bell that read, "May the state be peaceful and prosperous. May noble lords and servants be rich and cheerful." 2 of the characters on that bell in Japanese are the same as the characters that you'd use to make Tokugawa's name. Except for on the bell, the 2 characters are separated by another word. Clearly, this was a sign that Hideyoshi's heir wanted Tokugawa dismembered. Or at least that's what Tokugawa said, and that's why he declared war. And so with that, I'll wrap up the Sengoku Jidai. Hopefully we'll catch you next episode as we dive into the wild manipulations of the South Seas Company. Take care, everyone.